Tonight on Newswatch, a country divided as many push for revolution in Ukraine. A look at the growing number of pro-Russia protests. Plus, is the U.S. response to Ukraine making us look weak? Why some are questioning the administration's stance. And how the Texas Attorney General overcame a physical obstacle to serve his state. All this and more tonight on Newswatch. And good evening, I'm Heather Sells. World diplomats were working in Paris today trying to find a solution to the crisis in Ukraine. U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry met with a Russian foreign minister and other top leaders. Kerry wants to start a dialogue between Russia and Ukraine. So far, however, the Russian foreign minister is refusing to meet his Ukrainian counterpart. Back in Washington, the Obama administration reaffirmed its commitment to allies in Central and Eastern Europe. Defense Secretary Chuck Hagel told a Senate committee that the U.S. will step up joint training with Polish and Baltic forces. And Hillary Clinton weighed in today on the situation in Ukraine. She compared the Russian president to Adolf Hitler. Clinton says Vladimir Putin's call to protect ethnic Russians in Ukraine is similar to Hitler in the 1930s, saying he needed to protect ethnic Germans outside of Germany. Meanwhile, across the eastern parts of Ukraine, there's been a sudden explosion of pro-Russian demonstrations. George Thomas brings us tonight's top story from Kharkiv.
We drove 6 hours from Kiev to the industrial heartland and Ukraine's second most populous city. Here, many ethnic Russians want nothing more than to see Moscow invade and take control of eastern Ukraine, as they did the Crimean Peninsula.
Only Russia's President Vladimir Putin can save us from the illegitimate government in Kiev.
For several hours Tuesday, riot police blocked all roads near Kharkiv's city hall, as pro-Ukrainian and pro-Russian demonstrators continued their almost daily face-off. Russia's decision to order troops involved in military exercises near the Ukrainian border back to their base angered many people here.
I'm very upset. I wanted those troops to attack, and I would have been the first one to welcome Russian tanks to this square with flowers.
This past weekend, dozens were injured when pro-Russian demonstrators stormed City Hall, replacing European Union flags with Russian ones, and called for union with Moscow. By late Monday, police had regained control of the building, and the Ukrainian flag flew once again. But it isn't stopping protesters.
The majority of the folks who've gathered here, many of them are pro-Russian, have called on their supporters to continue to gather in front of City Hall every night at 6 p.m. until this crisis is resolved in their favor.
How is the church praying today for...
Denis Sinelnikov accuses Moscow of instigating the protests to create a reason for a broader invasion of Ukraine. Sinelnikov, a Christian, was filming at a pro-Russian demonstration when police arrested him. We met him shortly after his release.
There is a majority of ethnic Russians who want Moscow to invade, but the majority of these protesters are being sent from Russia to stir up problems.
In the last few days, 11 cities have witnessed sudden eruptions of pro-Russian demonstrations.
At the borderline, a united country.
Something of extreme concern to Ola and Lena.
I just don't like it that we have so much hostility in our city. Somebody for Russia, somebody for Ukraine. I just don't like it. I want people to live in peace. We don't want war with Russia. We're brothers. We need to get along with each other.
Kharkiv is only 20 miles from the Russian border. President Putin said Tuesday he hopes he won't have to use force in this part of eastern Ukraine, but left all military options open to protect ethnic Russians from violence. George Thomas, CBN News, Kharkiv, Ukraine.
A former Israeli ambassador is warning that weakness from the United States is sending the wrong signal to many countries, including nations like Iran and North Korea. Chris Mitchell has that story from Jerusalem.
While the Ukrainian crisis pits the U.S., Europe, and the West against Vladimir Putin's Russia, Israel and Middle Eastern countries are watching closely. A number of observers here in Israel believe that U.S. actions for the past several years, particularly in the Middle East, have set the stage for the current crisis in Ukraine.
There's no doubt that the severe erosion in the U.S. posture of deterrence, in the U.S. power projection throughout the world has triggered much more audacious or emboldened Russia.
Former Israeli ambassador to the U.S. Congress, Yoram Ettinger, says perceived weakness in U.S. foreign policy has sent a message to the enemies of Israel and the U.S.
The chief trigger of more emboldened Russia, more emboldened Iran, China, North Korea, Venezuela, has been the recent engagement by the U.S. with Iran. Rogue regimes throughout the world notice the U.S. literally appeasing Iran.
Ettinger believes the world needs a strong USA.
For global sanity, we need a very exceptional USA. We need a very deterring USA. A less exceptional USA, a non-deterring USA, only exacerbates the already insanity of the world.
As the crisis in Ukraine unfolds, U.S. foreign policy will be put to the test if it can stand up to the new threats in the 21st century. Chris Mitchell, CBN News, Jerusalem.
And for more of Chris's exclusive coverage from Israel, make sure you check out his weekly show and his blog, Jerusalem Dateline. You can find them at our website, cbnnews.com. Israeli naval forces seized a shipment of missiles earlier today. The advanced rockets were making their way from Iran to Palestinian militants in Gaza. The naval forces intercepted the shipment more than 1,000 miles south of Israel in the Red Sea. It contained dozens of high-power missiles that would have improved the terror capabilities of Gaza militants, putting nearly all of Israel in danger. And for more on this now, we turn to Dr. Emanuele Ottolenghi. I'm sorry, sir. He is an expert on Iran and a senior fellow at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. And, sir, if they hadn't been intercepted by Israel, how would these weapons likely have been used?
Well, they would have changed the balance of forces in the south of Israel. First and foremost, Hamas was the likely recipient of this weaponry. Although there were reports that perhaps some of it would have been moved on to terrorist groups operating inside the largely lawless Sinai Peninsula. These groups are loosely affiliated with Al-Qaeda. Either way, these long-range missiles would have been used against Israeli targets. Now, Israel has developed, of course, over the years, a number of responses, including the Iron Dome, to shut down incoming rockets. But so far, Hamas and the groups in the peninsula have not had such long-range precision weaponry. These weapons shot from Gaza could have reached just about the whole of Israel, as opposed to Israeli towns and kibbutzim in the south of the country. So it would have been a complete change of the rules of the game.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, as you know, was in the U.S. this week. Numerous times he warned that Israel should do whatever it needs to protect itself from Iran. What do you think he means?
Look, we can speculate about what Israel will and will not do, and whether it will do it and when. What the Prime Minister of Israel is saying is that Israel cannot afford to allow a regime like Iran, the same regime that has just dispatched this kind of deadly weaponry, the same regime that has had no compunction in backing a cruel, ruthless dictator as Bashar al-Assad in Syria slaughter 130,000 and counting of its own people. It cannot allow such a regime to acquire the ultimate weapon.
All right, Dr. Ottolenghi, we are out of time, but thank you so much for your time. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
The woman at the center of the IRS Tea Party scandal appeared today on Capitol Hill, but Lois Lerner didn't offer any insights into the government's targeting of conservative groups. After being sworn in, Chairman Darrell Issa repeatedly asked Lerner about her involvement in the scandal, but Lerner refused to answer, much like she did last May when she appeared before the panel.
In February of 2014, President Obama stated that there was not a smidgen of corruption in the IRS targeting. Ms. Lerner, Do you believe that there is not a smidgen of corruption in the IRS targeting of conservatives?
On the advice of my counsel, I respectfully exercise my Fifth Amendment right and decline to answer that question.
Republicans on the committee are considering whether to hold Lerner in contempt of Congress. Her attorney tried to prevent today's appearance because he says she and her family have received numerous death threats over the case. The American Center for Law and Justice says Lerner's refusal to testify is a tactic aimed at preventing Congress from getting to the bottom of the targeting scandal. The ACLJ represents 41 organizations in a federal lawsuit against the IRS. And although Lerner won't answer questions before Congress, the group says other lawsuits may force her to open up.
In our civil case, as that moves forward, people like Lois Lerner, who can take the Fifth, and that means that her testimony, she didn't have to testify, so she couldn't be used against incriminating herself in a criminal trial. In a civil trial, so as we move forward to get to those stages, if she still refuses to testify, that can be actually taken as an inference against her. The Fifth Amendment only protects you from criminal, not civil. So there are ways that we can get to the bottom of this.
The ACLJ says Lerner's decision not to testify reflects the lack of cooperation between investigators and the Obama administration. Illinois' Attorney General says county clerks can immediately begin issuing marriage licenses to same-sex couples, even though the state law legalizing gay marriage doesn't take effect for another 3 months. That decision comes after a federal judge ruled last month that the state's ban on gay marriage is unconstitutional. Illinois' Democratic governor agrees and is urging clerks across his state to follow the Attorney General's guidance. Cook County, where Chicago is located, already began issuing marriage licenses to gay couples last month. Coming up, how a high-protein diet could be hurting your body. Eating a high-protein diet could be unhealthy if you are middle-aged. It might even be as harmful as smoking cigarettes. That's according to a study from the University of Southern California. Middle-aged people who got most of their protein from animal sources like meat and dairy were 4 times as likely to die from cancer. But protein from plants didn't have the same effect. For older people, 66 and up, a higher protein diet turned out to be good. Older folks who ate a higher protein diet were less likely to die from cancer. Researchers say diet can have a different effect at different stages of life. And our health reporter, Lori Johnson, has taken a closer look at this study and is here to explain it, which is a good thing, Lori, because a lot of us in the newsroom, as you know, we're very confused today, right, trying to understand all of this. But go ahead and explain. The study says high-protein diets are bad for middle-aged people, but good for older people.
Right. And, you know, that's their conclusion. And as with all studies, you have to ask yourself, are the results reliable? And in this case, they are. It's a very big study out of USC over a period of nearly 20 years. They studied 6,000 Americans over age 50, and they found that the people between the ages of 50 and 65 who ate high-protein diets had a higher risk of cancer. But the people over age 65 who ate high-protein diets had a lower risk of cancer. And by high protein, they meant over 20% of their total calories. But listen to this. They're only talking about animal protein in the form of meat and cheese. In fact, the study showed that no matter what their age, people who ate high-protein diets in the form of plant-based proteins like beans and nuts did not have an increase in cancer risk. Now, their explanation for why too much meat and cheese causes cancer in middle-aged people is because they say it activates a growth hormone that causes cancer cells to grow in middle-aged people, but that growth hormone diminishes in senior citizens, so that high animal protein diets in senior citizens, folks over age 65, are actually good. It is a bit confusing.
Depends on the protein. Now, explain this, Lori. Lately, we have heard about the dangers of high carbohydrate diets. Now we're talking about the dangers of high protein diets, and then of course there's also the danger of high fat diets. So how do you sort all that out?
Right, just go on an all water diet.
Right.
No, I know, because there are only 3 types of foods: proteins, carbohydrates, and fats. Now the secret, though, is Each one of those food groups contains good and bad foods. There's a ton of evidence that bad carbs like sugar and breads cause cancer, diabetes, and a whole slew of other health problems. So we need to stay away from those bad carbs, but eat lots of good carbs, vegetables, ideally at every meal, and in smaller doses, fruit like berries. Now, when it comes to fat, we know that trans fats, the hydrogenated oils, are very bad, arguably the most dangerous food there is. These do cause cancer and heart disease, but we should eat the good fats, olive oil, fish oil, coconut oil. Now, when it comes to protein, stay away from the processed meats like bacon and deli meats that are processed with nitrates and nitrites that have been proven to cause cancer. Stay away from the meats that have been injected with steroids and antibiotics, but instead eat grass-fed beef, organic chicken, and clean fish. And as far as cheese, Heather, we've known for quite some time that dairy protein, like cheese, has been linked to cancer, and a lot of people have digestive problems with cheese and other dairy products, so that actually is a good thing to stay away from.
All right.
I know, that's my weakness too.
All right. Thanks, Lori. Well, we are coming up with more. Up next, stay true to the Constitution and his faith. A look at the driving force behind the Attorney General of Texas. Primary voting in Texas has set the stage for the next gubernatorial election there. The state's current Attorney General, Republican Greg Abbott, will face off against Democrat Wendy Davis for the office. You may remember Davis is the state senator who gained national attention last year after leading a nearly 13-hour-long filibuster over abortion restrictions in Texas. Abbott has served as the state's Attorney General since 2003. He's also a former Texas Supreme Court justice, and he's also known as one who takes on the establishment. It's one of the reasons he's become a hero to conservatives across the country. But he is also becoming a model for another group, the disabled. As Paul Strand explains in tonight's Focus Report, Abbott has spent the last 3 decades in a wheelchair, but that apparently hasn't slowed him down yet.
For Greg Abbott, it's all about being faithful to the U.S. Constitution, a document he believes is based not on men's ideas, but eternal, immutable truth.
Certain founding fundamental principles that have caused it to be the greatest country in the world. And these are principles that pass the test of time and will exist always.
And it's all about being true to the God this preacher's grandchild says he's known since he was a little boy.
Faith has been a part of my life since the earliest times I can remember.
Abbott needed that faith like never before when he had a horrible encounter in 1984.
I was out jogging one day and a big 80-foot oak tree fell on me, hit me in the back, fractured my vertebrae and my spinal cord, leaving me instantly and forever paralyzed, needing to use a wheelchair.
Abbott says Texans are generally can-do, positive people of faith, and that's one of the reasons this lifelong Texan spent little time questioning God and asking, why me?
That question may have arisen for a day or for an hour, but really no longer than that. And the reason why those questions didn't linger really is because of my faith, because I've always been one who believed that God has a pathway forward for us. And frankly, it's one of those times when I leaned on God, leaned on my faith more than ever before, and was literally pulled up, pulled forward, moved onward because of the role that God played in my life during that challenging time.
30 years later, Abbott chats freely about his disability, even joking about it. He says some politicians will talk about having a steel spine, while he actually has one. But on the serious side, this former Texas Supreme Court justice points out Texans have never held the wheelchair against him.
It doesn't matter who you are, where you're from, what your situation is. If you bring to the table a can-do spirit, such as it doesn't matter that I'm in a wheelchair, I can be a judge, or I can be Attorney General, or I can be whatever I want to be. Texans are welcoming of that attitude.
The Attorney General says Texans believe so strongly in the God of liberty, they strongly backed Abbott's successful defense of this monument to the 10 Commandments at the state capitol, a case that put him before the U.S. Supreme Court.
Everyone understands the role that God plays in our life, and that's why we are able to vigorously defend things like the Ten Commandments and have the general public strongly support things like that.
That love of liberty also pushes Abbott to get around on his own as much as possible, often surprising people as he drives around Austin in a car that's all hand-controlled.
One thing I really cherish is my independence, not just fighting for independence in the legal system, but my own independence. You know, we as Texans, and I think Americans, are an independent people.
This politician quickly points out, though, that just driving Texas roads is good enough for him.
I have no eye on Washington. I have my eye on making Texas as great of a state as it can be.
But he insists Texas is such an example of what is best about America, it must continue to be deeply involved in the great issues facing the nation.
And what Texas is trying to do is to stand on the principles of independence, of liberty, of constitutional principles and faith, and expand that ideology to other states.
Paul Strand, CBN News, reporting from Austin, Texas.
Up next, the story of a love letter showing up decades after it was sent. An unopened World War II love letter recently made its way into the hands of a Florida woman thousands of miles away from its intended destination. Sheila Polk loves anything related to World War II, especially memorabilia, and she recently bought an old book about the war at a Goodwill store. Inside, she discovered an unopened letter from a soldier in California, addressed to Private First Class Helen Rothermel, stationed in Dallas.
Her life could have been changed from this one letter, you know. It's a personal, sentimental thing. You know, they do movies about lost love letters, and I'm thinking, who knows what's in here that she's never seen? And I would love, if she's around, I'd love for her to get it.
It appears the post office did try to deliver the letter 3 times, but it never found its way to Rothermel. And that is all for this edition of Newswatch. Remember that you can email us your comments and your questions at newswatch@cbn.com. We hope you'll join us next time.